My my name is Akila Reynolds, and I am the Assistant Clinical Director and the Doctoral Director at Community Institute for Psychotherapy. We also have Amanda Mason here. She is the Assistant Clinical Director as well, and she will be presenting, but I'll talk to you more about her. And we have Robin here. She is our Executive Director and also helping us monitor the Zoom for any questions. We're so glad to be able to offer this series to provide an opportunity for you all to learn and for all of us to think together about these important things that are affecting our families. Learning about mental health and wellness issues is so important to help us decrease stigma and to ultimately raise healthy families. A little bit about Community Institute for Psychotherapy, also known as CIP. We are a nonprofit tax-exempt center founded in 1977 to provide quality, affordable mental health services to Marin individuals and families so that they may reestablish mental and emotional well-being and live satisfying and productive lives. CIP offers short-term and long-term outpatient psychotherapy on a sliding scale fee basis to adults, children, families, and couples who would otherwise not be able to afford such services. We want to start off by thanking and acknowledging Mary Jane Burke and John Carroll, as well as the Marin County Office of Education for co-sponsoring this series. We also would not be here without our sponsors. These are businesses in Marin who care. So please take note of them, and when you have the occasion, seek them out to do business. They're helping Marin be healthier. First Federal Savings and Loan, Family Recovery Institute, Bank of Marin, Delfino Green and Green, Luther Burbank, and WMB2. Without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce my colleague, Amanda Mason. She is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in Marin County, as well as an assistant clinical director here at CIP. She has a lot of knowledge and information to share with you today. And I just want to pass it over to her because she has so much prepared. We ask that if you have questions, please type them in the chat box, as well as we'll be having some questions that Amanda will be able to answer towards the end of the session.
Okay, hi everybody, welcome. I'm hoping that we'll have a lot to learn today, and thank you, Akila. I'm trying to queue up something for you guys really quickly. Let's see here, share screen and play. Let's see, what do you guys see?
The gallery. Oh, there
Do you see?
You're good. We see your slides.
You see your slides? Okay. All right. Let me just go back. Hold on one second. Okay. Let me just get rid of this. Okay. All right. So let me know if the sound is okay, but so as a therapist and as a clinical psychologist, one of the most rewarding aspects of doing what I do is harnessing intention and desire and removing barriers to that intention for growth and interpersonal success. So today, if you're willing, we might partner together towards this end. And I assume that the reason you are here is because you care about a teen in life and you are interested in maximizing the full potential of that teen. So it's perhaps because you realize that you are one of the most important and influential factors in launching healthy, agentic, well-balanced, compassionate, intentional human beings. And together tonight, we're united in this goal. So our kids have left the relatively protected harbor of childhood and have moved into this critical stage between childhood dependency and adult responsibility. We realize how quickly time has flown and how precious are each remaining nightly sleep wells, all too soon becoming only deliverable via text, video chat, or audio messaging. It's possible we are so far ahead of ourselves, we are even wondering about those post-launch moments when we wonder, about when is the next time we'll see our fledged loved one. We hope to gift our kids a leg up, a safe harbor, and a sense of belonging that may fill them up and from which they may borrow as needed. And so, given this little time we have, let's make the most of it and dive right in. In our presentation today, will cover in brief tested and proven assists to communicating and relating to our teens in a way that offers them a model for meeting the developmental challenges of the adolescent years.
Amanda, let
Finding
me just
self a
interrupt.
positive role
Amanda.
in a robust and healthy social circle. Physiological maturation and speedy and reliable interconnectivity of differentiated and increasingly specialized areas of neural anatomy. There are a good many challenges our teens face. Getting enough sleep is perhaps among the greatest, but the landscape is fraught with mental well-being landmines. Rampant seclusion and alienation, even still in our post-COVID era, contrasting with the ubiquitous and euphoric penetration of curated social media, its concurrent cataclysmic rise of adolescent anxiety and depression, a catastrophic tsunami of alienation and negative comparison. In its wake, suicidal rates of 30 and 18%,
Amanda,
girls and boys.
Amanda,
Yeah.
hi. There's nothing on the screen except for it's just yellow.
Oh no,
Yeah,
seriously?
this entire time from the very beginning.
Oh no. Okay, hold on.
I was trying to let you know, but
Oh, thank you. Yes, no, let me share, sorry, the other screen.
And also there's quite loud music that's making it hard to understand you.
What do you see now?
now we
You
see
see all the
acting
faces.
parent. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe turn down the volume of the music a little.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead and then I'll tell you.
Okay. So, pediatric psychiatrist and interpersonal neurobiologist Dan Siegel, he coined the term phobia, which is fear of being inferior. It's rampant in this age, driven by algorithms innocently seeding future consumer behavior years from current product to market. We may feel that in the age of school shootings, of environmental anxiousness, and world economic instability, that our kids face a Sisyphean task in growing up and launching to become productive, effective global citizens. But most teens, perhaps the lucky ones, have always had at least one ace in the hole, and that is us. We parents, care providers, therapists, coaches, mentors, role models, we can make a difference. We can help to reorient a kid to their inner light, to hope, a plan, and a purpose. We find the fortitude to do that from within ourselves, actually. And this is what the presentation covers today. We're going to cover 5 skills honed within each of us that when practiced become accessible and generalizable and resource capital for our kids, our teens, and our future. So buckle up and lean in. Not everything we're going to hear today will be easy or comfortable. Some of it will certainly challenge myths about teen parenting. It may tap our inner fears, but it will also secure within us hope, inspiration, and also practical motivation to partner with our teens, to be reassured when it looks dark, and to anchor patience, kindness, compassion, and generosity for us and for them. So let's do it. All right. Can you see my slides now still?
Yes, but we see the notes.
You see my notes too. Okay, thank you. Okay. Don't know why this is, and do you see my notes still?
It's just
No
gallery view
notes,
right now.
but no slides either.
Oh, okay, I see what's happened. Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. Share. Okay. All right, I got it. No, it's still doing it wrong. Okay. Sorry, one more second. Let me just try one more thing. Okay. Now what do you see? Both notes too?
No, it's just the gallery. No
It's just
presentation.
the gallery now.
Yeah, no
Okay.
presentation slide.
Well, okay, what are you seeing now?
We see the slides. If it's
Do you see the
fine.
slides in the navigator?
Yes.
Ah, why is this working I did it so well for everybody else, but when it's my turn, I'm struggling here, people. I'm so sorry. Okay, what do you see now?
We see the slides and your notes. I
Slides
think,
in my notes.
yeah,
Okay,
but I mean, yeah,
that's
it's
fine.
okay.
Okay,
I think that's fine.
That's fine.
yeah, I'm just gonna do it a different way.
While Amanda's putting the last touches on getting this ready for us, I was wondering if anyone has any questions that maybe you're really wanting to ask, you can type those in the chat box right now so we can make sure that we can get to them by the end of the presentation.
Okay, so our information today comes from psychosocial and occupational sciences and from neuropsychological, neurobiological, and interpersonal neurobiology, from developmental psychology and communication sciences. It comes from Nobel nominees and award-winning research and thought leaders from their own respective and interrelated fields of study. We're going to look at the links between secure attachment and optimized neural development and integration. And we're going to look at connections between neural integration and the optimization of regulation across emotions, thoughts, and physiology. So we're going to cover 5 key relational concepts and briefly talk about how to inculcate them into your family culture. So with helpful lists of what to do instead, including debunking some pretty heinous myths about teen parenting, we will redefine conditions that promote versus hinder teen development. Okay. Okay. All right, we'll just do it this way. Okay, so Stanford professor of psychology Carol Dweck coined the term growth mindset. She identified 2 types of mindsets, fixed and growth, and a quick review of the infographic here provides a pretty good differentiation between the 2 types of mindsets that people tend to demonstrate. As many other psychologists have rightly shared, that language shapes our reality. It's important for parents to really key into how our words shape the realities of our teens. For instance, if a child has been over and over again praised for the outcome of their effort, they learn to lean out of further opportunity to prove or disprove the label provided by parents. So specifically, children whose parents extol their praises, oh, that's a wonderful piece of art, sweetie, or you're so good at math, you play the piano so well, you're the fastest in your group, the best player on the team, etc. These children become teens who opt out of opportunities that could potentially end with them falling short of their podium in the future. So the point is that kids who are raised for making 100 on their math test, etc., these are the same teens who stop trying to challenge themselves as a way of protecting their label. So how unfortunate, as ongoing practice and specifically challenging practice is what actually builds mastery skills. And what we know is that the backlash of parental overpraise about outcome as opposed to effort means that we have older kids and teens who avoidantly sit on their laurels versus re-entering the next round. They drop out of challenges or don't enter them at all unless they're sure to win, especially girls. According to 2013's Top Dog, The Science of Winning and Losing by Poe Bronson and Ashley Merriman, who've just won at least 9 honors awards from institutions like the Penn Center, USA Literary Award for Journalism, the American Association for the Advancement of Science Toward Award for Science and Journalism, an Audie Award, and a Mensa Foundation Award. They sum a growing body of research, Carol Dweck's among others, demonstrating that giving kids the label smart does not prevent them from underperforming. Rather, it may actually be a cause of their underperformance. So instead of constant praise, reassurance, and gratifying, here's some good questions you can ask your teens that reveal your desire to spotlight effort over outcome. So tip here is fostering growth mindset. What's going to be challenging today? Were you able to stay with it when it got hard? What helps when you need encouragement? So showing enthusiasm and interest to your kids about their experience of the planning before the doing, or the thoughts on their approach to doing something novel or more challenging, is really the key here for us as parents. And it's this reflexive inquiry that encourages growth mindset. The time and attention that we opportune for our kids to tell us about how they are going about doing whatever it is that they're doing, and what they learned and can take away from the experience, is really the key to centering our interest on process versus output. So that is, our interest shines on the efforts of the child teen versus the outcome of those efforts. Not a, I see what you did there, Newt. Great job, old boy. But well, Newt, tell me about how you came up with that idea. How did you decide to take that approach? What did you learn from it? How did you feel about the effort you invested? Would you have wanted to do more? Go about it differently next time? How would you improve it if you had more resources? Is it scalable in some way? What would you do next time? Really cool efforts here, my boy. I love hearing about your passion and interest here. The positive kudos are really extolled based on your child or teen's efforts, plan, thoughtfulness, consideration, reflexive learning, passion, interest, and sharing and connecting their experiment with others, including you. All right. So Alison Gopnik, world-renowned expert in child development and author of several popular books, including The Scientist in the Crib, The Philosophical Baby, and The Gardener and the Carpenter, won the 2021 Carl Sagan Prize for Science Popularization. Her research from the Cognitive Development and Learning Lab, in collaboration with Berkeley's developmental labs and based in the Institute of Human Development at UC Berkeley, they study children's creativity, learning, and cognition, kind of how children learn causal relationships, cases where one event causes another. They also study child motivation and innovation. And in collaboration with computer scientists, researchers are currently using Baynes net formalism to explain how children are able to learn causal structures from patterns of data. And we have demonstrated that young children have much more powerful causal learning mechanisms than was previously supposed. Belief nets, they're graphical ways of representing kind of local dependencies among sets of variables. Unfortunately, children, like machine learning AI, make gross errors in terms of computational probabilistics. So when bad data in, like praise from parents on outcome versus effort, the child mind really can't possibly identify what it is we're desiring. And that is that we're desiring effort, not outcome. So it's an alignment problem, and that's what we would rather be positively reinforcing in our kids. So what we need to do as parents is really go slowly with praise and interest, and in turning toward more mindfully, you might not necessarily ask what they got on the test, but rather how the test went, and prior to, how was the studying going? Okay. So arguably, up to 70% of communication is nonverbal. So let's really take this twofold. First, nonverbally, I'd like to ask each of us to go back to our experience of being parented. So how did your care providers kind of greet you? What was meaningful about it? Ask yourself for a second, how did your care provider's face and body language affect you? Just kind of take that in for a minute. What did it message or signal to you? Does everybody have a good kind of visual for what that looked like? Okay, so now how about your family cat or your family dog? So in relational science, we look at greetings and partings. We look at eye contact, touch, licking and grooming behaviors, which are the delivery of nonverbal care and comfort. When we greet our teens, do we look past the packaging or appreciate it because of its splendid uniqueness or celebration of youthfulness? Do we honor our relationship with them or to them by and in our approach to greeting them? Can we override any reactivity or alarm to first prioritize unconditional positive regard, interest, and message our love to them? So I'd like you to ask if you can kind of think about that teen in your own life and think about maybe the recent past, but would our hello indicate the following? I've been positively anticipating our union. I've held you positively in my mind as we've been apart. I don't need you to be different in order for me to respect your personhood. I don't need you to be different in order for me to enjoy this moment with you. So what does our face, our affect, message our teen at reunion? And what about when they are downloading their day with us? A celebration, a trouble, suffering, insecurity, joy, excitement, concern, or delight, etc. What's the quality of our presence in that moment? Are we distracted? Are we really paying deep attention? Do we sit down and kind of go eye level? Or are we kind of like talking about it as we're like kind of passing? So some things are kind of harder to hear than others, but when we effectively message them that we are interested in care, here is what they're distilling. So our nonverbals are really important. So in our nonverbals, our kids are really taking in the answer to these questions. Do you see me? Do you care that I'm here? Am I enough? Or do you need me to be better in some way? Can I tell that I'm special by the way that you look at me? So coming together in a spirit of curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love doesn't mean we're endorsing behaviors or choices in any given moment. It just means that we're demonstrating love, that we're a safe place where two hearts can meet. We want to save disagreements for outside of reunion. We want to collect our teen emotionally and relationally first by prioritizing understanding prior to any attempt to influence them in any way. And this creates a lot of relational capital that we can then leverage to foster mutual understanding. So open their ears to hear our perspective. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But let's break down relational communication a little further with some tips. Okay. So relational communication is consent-based. And this doesn't mean that if Junior really wants to talk, then that's that. They don't really want to talk. But there's a skill to approach needing to talk. The magazine Inc., the Entrepreneur's Journal, provided this tip, and it works for teens just as it works for spouses or workplace emails. First, really begin and think about the desired end in mind in terms of your communication. Think about when, ideally, you might like to cross whatever it is off the list and speak to that in the first place. So you say, son, ideally, I'd like to take care of making this decision tonight, but it will have to take place of your Friday after school kickback if we can't resolve it before Thursday evening. So let them know when is your deadline and what we might need to change in order to accomplish the talk about whatever. So relational communication is also flexible. It accommodates the needs of both parties and realizes that it's not a bad thing that everybody experiences things differently. There are multiple realities, both valid experiences, and even of the same activity or shared experience. Nobody's going to see exactly the same thing. Relational communication is kind, and it embraces diverging points of views and experiences and needs, wants, and dreams. Okay. So another one is prioritizing understanding. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to ask for their experience and just have them talk with us. And then we want to always reflect what we heard. We want to validate and empathize. No matter what we're really hearing, we still want to like see it from their perspective, walking a mile in their shoes. And we always want to explore and query. Otherwise, we risk kind of it's like this ping pong that's going back and forth. The communication's not really landing with anybody. And our child tells us something, but if we don't really turn towards it and like look at it and ask questions, etc., if we just say, oh yeah, that's really great, or oh, let me tell you about this thing, then it's like they don't really feel that we're like attending and catching what they've just shared with us. And then that's an attachment message, whether we mean it or not, or we're just busy. It's maybe unintentional, but it really lands deeply with them. So relational communication is mindful communication. It prioritizes understanding before it attempts to influence. We talked about that. And it takes time, space, and lots of resources. So it's intentional, slow, workable, and regulated, and predictable. Okay. So there's one question that does so much neurobiologically, and it's the question that asks, do I understand this issue from your point of view? So on the tip, once you've listened to your teen and they've really kind of told you what they wanted to share with you and they've passed that message, now you have to check in, you've reflected it all back to them, you've asked them a couple questions, but you have to do this one last step. And you say, do I understand this issue from your point of view? Do I see it as you do? Or am I missing something? Now, if they add more detail at this minute, you should pat yourself on the back, because that means you were really a safe listener and they really believed that it was like authentic and genuine, your interest, and that you wanted to hear more. And so here's why it works. 1, it tells our teen that we really care about what they want to share with us. 2, it tells them, I'm going to take time to really hear what's happening for you. I don't need to rush it. If you have more to share, I'm listening. So this communicates to them that they are our priority. It communicates to them that we validate their perspective taking. It communicates to them that we see them as distinct, individuated person, which is deeply respectful. So really asking this question, we are positively affirming all 4 of those attachment needs that we reviewed a little bit earlier. It creates so much generosity of spirit for the conversation at hand. And I can't stress enough how important and life-changing this question can be in terms of improving all of your important conversations. So I really hope you'll give the golden question a try and see what you think. Okay. So relational communication is also clear and direct, and it's also kind. So you'll definitely gain more cooperation by seeding your startup with some gentleness. So John Gottman, he's the guy who really came up with gentle startup, and it's a part of his method of approach in terms of satisfied couple relationships. But he famously wrote that the first 3 minutes of any conflict discussion not only predict just the outcome of that discussion, but also the outcome of the relationship. So a good discussion of differences or needs or requests requires a few things. So it requires starting well and being very intentional. It requires you to have pre-processed your goals for the conversation concisely, and then to go about setting up the discussion for success. Pre-processing means identifying your end goal, your request, what is essential about that request. So these are things that you want to do outside of, you don't want to do it like in the middle of the interaction. You want to kind of like, be thoughtful about it beforehand and really set up the conversation for success. You might ask, what is essential about that request? What if that request is not met would lead to resentment on your end? What are all the ways one could meet that request? What are your flexible areas about meeting the request? And how ideally would you like it to go? And what dreams, values, needs, desires are reflected in the specific request? If the conflict discussion reflects criticism, remember that within every criticism is a positive desire or a hope or a wish. That's what you want to find. You want to lead with that versus what would be experienced as kind of reproachful fear coming at them. When I'm working with my couples clients, then we always talk about, you know, when you're telling your partner about your experience and you're asking them for something, don't tell them what not to go grocery shopping for, what not to put in the grocery shopping cart, right? When you tell them to go to the store, you don't want to tell them, well, don't buy milk and don't buy bread. I mean, who knows what you're going to get, right? Instead, be really direct and tell them exactly what it is that you're looking for. And sometimes that actually takes us quite a bit of pre-processing. So I just want to encourage you to try that. So we can broadcast our process so that it's visible and transparent to our teams. And that scaffolds the communication skills that they are going to need with others. So we are really practice ground zero for what they can do in the real world. We want to start off with first understanding ideal desires. What am I, or you, or we flexible on? What could help increase our flexibility? What are all the ways in which, all the ways in which we could achieve our ideal desire here? Oh, that one's a really important question, our ideal desire. Just go for that. What's not on the table in terms of us compromising? What's really workable? What's core about this issue for me here? What personally held values are here for me on this issue? What is my ideal outcome? How does this decision relate to the stories of myself? Are these stories relevant to me today? Or to the situation? Or for my team? What is influencing my desires here? How might others come in on this issue? Maybe your partner, for instance, or maybe their sibling. Would their values steer them differently? What are our family values? What are all the meanings here? And is this an opportunity to create shared meaning? What is the end goal? How do my fears weigh in on this issue? And how about love, trust, and surrender? Relational communication models generosity, but it starts with clear ideas about what would work best for you. It often requires pre-processing. It's reflexive learning at its core. And reflexivity has 3 components. We're going to talk about those a little bit later, but for right now, reflecting in action, on action, and for action. So we want to model this in terms of sharing with your team your experience and how experience can drive learning and growth going forward. Okay. All right, so another tip, relational communication, is this really amazing concept called assumption of similarity. And this concept, assumption of similarity, was actually used in the resolution of the crisis in the Balkans. And so well, I'll tell you a little bit more about this. So relational communication doesn't put people on pedestals or in the corner. Relational communication does the opposite of signaling contempt. It sees confidently the best in all of us. It searches for context and is compassionate. Tara Brach, the seminal author on self-compassion, defines 2 types of self-compassion and fierce self-compassion. While fierce self-compassion won't shy away from boundaries and limits, it acknowledges them with calm confidence, acceptance, and conviction. Again, it's a topic really for another conversation, but this concept of respecting self and others and believing in the best of us is really important. Here's how it applies. We risk so much by focusing on how we are different versus recognizing our commonality. Some relational experts say approaching difficult situations with some API, which is like assumption of positive intent, can go really far. And in the Gottman method, we use the Nobel nominee Anatole Rappaport assumption of similarity and his concept to really find our compassion and transform critical content by identifying when a critical thought comes up for us, you know, potentially, oh my gosh, they left out the laundry. And then we think to ourselves, well, when was the last time we were too tired to fold the laundry, to wash the dishes, and could have been a better housemate or family member by not martyring ourselves and pushing through, unless that was truly fulfillment for ourselves in that moment and didn't produce resentment. So the key piece of assumption of similarity is when you notice that critical thought about your teenager or anyone else for that matter, even yourself, when was the last time that you kind of were in that same situation, and you maybe didn't squeeze the sponge out at the sink, or you left your bike on the front lawn and, you know, lo and behold, it got stolen. Like, when was the last time something like that happened to you? And then that kind of creates this, like, you know, equalness between us, and really invokes a lot of compassion, and then can break up that criticism, and then we can see the person underneath that. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so we sometimes operate under this fear-based assumption that others will take advantage, or that fear-based attitude arises and says, give them an inch and they're going to take a mile. But this simply is not the outcome found by game theory or other relational science investigations. Actually, generosity and flexibility promote generosity and flexibility. So, and we will, of course, have to know our limits too and assert our needs as well. You know, I had an example, had I not had the bandwidth to offer support to my daughter, because I needed to do something else when I had asked her to fold up the laundry, for instance, then I would have had to have a different set of conditions on which or how the task would have been needed to have been accomplished. I would have changed things. If I noticed that she was like suffering and looked really sick or something, and, you know, I had asked her to kind of get engaged and get the, you know, stay focused and get the laundry folded, I might want to, you know, also identify what my limits are. Do I really need the laundry folded? Do I just need the laundry to be put out of the living room? So a key to responding well to those types of moments with our kids is knowing our own limits. And what would it be like for me to leave this laundry unfolded tonight? What are my needs here? In what ways, or how could I be flexible with this? And if we aren't going to fold the laundry tonight, would it be helpful for me or her to move it back into the laundry room or her bedroom? Or is it more helpful for me to fold it up myself? And you always want to ask yourself, well, what is fulfillment for me in this moment? And then that kind of sucks away all the blame that can sometimes get out, and you're really like taking responsibility and living accountability and modeling that to our teens. And they're really watching and they're picking that up for sure. Okay. All right, so let's dial into reflexivity. And we were talking a little bit about that earlier. We're going to look at this other concept, fostering agency by embracing failure. So this is the third of the concepts that we're going to talk about tonight. So agency is the capacity of individuals to have the power and resources to fulfill their potential. Loosely, it requires actionable behavior on the part of the individual to achieve desired or necessary ends. Agentic people have learned how to get out there and really figure things out. And teens need to become comfortable with failing, as we've already described. And reflexivity is just the tool to take the pressure off of outcome-driven behavior and to sync intrinsic motivation and growth mindset towards adopting an attitude of becoming a lifelong learner. So reflexivity, we're going to keep coming back to that again and again tonight, but it's a pretty easy model, actually. It has 3 components: reflecting in action, on action, and for action. We want to model reflexivity. We want to talk about it in our own life and how we're using it, and make it kind of a part of the family culture. It's going to have value as we process it by talking about our own process awareness. So we can model this in terms of sharing with our teen our experience and how mindful and reflexive experiencing drives learning and growth. So just think about something that you're wanting to learn from, and then kind of pull it apart into those three steps. So let me give you an example of reflexivity's three components. So the other day, this was the example I was going to bring in earlier, I was observing fatigue in my daughter. And I imagine she's probably fighting another cold, or she didn't sleep well the night before. And I watched as she kind of melted and did that nonverbal signaling, the negative response to my encouraging her to complete her chore before she lost track of time. So that's reflection in action. Do you see it? And then reflection on action was, I realized I didn't really want to push my agenda because I recognized I was asking her to do more than I believed she could independently do in that moment, even as I didn't exactly know what her limit was at the time. So I replaced a power struggle with her because in action I was aware, and on action I was seeing that the limit could come up. And so while I didn't really want to let her out of her chore, she wasn't really that sick. I invited her to do the chore with me helping her, so together. And she took the offer and we had a quality experience together. So my reflection for action was identifying my wonder about whether or not she was really going to be able to complete the chore independently, estimating that I had the resources and time to spend with her, and knowing that she liked working with me so we could do it together. I was flexible, aware, and compassionate. And she doesn't take advantage of that. She appreciated it. And I explained that I saw that she looked like she could use some support, and she smiled, having truly been seen and shown compassion. And so this is an example of this in action for us, and also how we can translate that and be transparent about what's happening for us, so that we make available the model that we hope that they would adopt and try on. So good skill acquisition. Okay. So here's reflection in action and some questions, those questions that we talked about earlier at the very beginning that we were going to bring up. These are some good questions to be able to ask your teen, and even just to kind of like talk about at the family dinner table, or in the car ride, or on the way home from school, or those types of really precious moments that we get to kind of talk. What were you aware of when you were so engaged in that, whatever that thing was that they were doing? What was happening around you? What was your plan? So here's some examples of reflection on action, some questions that we want to bring up. And remember, we're rehearsing these for ourselves. And then because we're rehearsing them for ourselves, they're so much more available, and they kind of come off the tongue so much easier because we're doing the process ourselves. So reflection on action is, well, how was it for you? What was it like? In the end, did you realize what you were hoping for? And in what way did your experience really surprise you? So here's reflection for action. How would you do things differently next time? If you were going to iterate your plan, what resources would you need? Which ones would you use next time? What might help in the future? Do you guys kind of see the gist of those types of questions? Okay, so next up is our fourth skill, and this is called instituting security. So what does security look like with a teen? A lot is at stake. How do I know that it really works? What does it look like or sound like in real life? And how do I foster attachment security? So we'll answer all these questions. But instituting security, this was a really big, giant concept. We always want to have authenticity and transparency with our kids. We want them to kind of be able to see us work in, process. And what happens is that they are watching and picking up our process, and they're valuing it as they see we value it, and as they see it works for us. So in instituting security, we also want to always have kind of consent-based contact. So we don't want to kind of like lord over, be that kind of coercive or Socratic method questioning them about, you know, any particular thing. We also want to be highly predictable. This also works in relationships and in marriages. One of the key findings is that people who rate their relationship as pretty satisfactory, there's a high degree of predictability. And maybe not predictability in terms of date night necessarily, but predictability in terms of how we communicate. Like, what are the rituals for getting into communication and for exiting communication? Because if we don't have a ritual, if we don't have something that's super predictable, then what happens is there's a lot of ambiguity, and we experience that ambiguity in our body as tension. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But okay, and then the other thing that we want to have, and also predictable in terms of our response and our openness and our receptivity to our kids. We really want to have compassionate and neutral effect. We really want to pay attention to like our reactions and our responses to our kids and teens. We want to tell them what you hope you will achieve at the end of each conversation and what you want from them so that they can consent and they can give you what you want. And people like that. Like if you say, hey, if you say to your teen, hey, we need to talk, or you say that to your spouse, right? What's the response? Well, I gotta go to the bathroom, or like, I think somebody's calling, right? But if you said to yourself, you said to your partner or to your teen, hey, I want to talk about the laundry. I think it's going to take 5 minutes, and what I'm hoping for at the end of that conversation is that we have a better schedule that I think will work for both of us. Can we talk about that right now, or can we talk about it? When can we talk about it before, you know, bedtime, right? And so then that gives them the ability to fully consent to the conversation and the communication. And it decreases anxiety and tension in the body. Anytime you're decreasing anxiety and tension in the body, in the neurobiology of attachment, we always consider that a repair. And people who pepper their conversations with repairs, they're decreasing their tension all of the time, and their communications are much more positive. There's a lot more social generosity, and they tend to be able to progress through the conversation to a desirable end much more quickly. So their communications are highly effective and efficient. So just think about that. Oh, and the definition of like a repair, right, is basically, and I just told you this, but anything that decreases tension. So that could be, and this is like a myth. So you're talking to your child and they break eye contact and they're looking out the window and they say something about, well, Mom, when are we going to get the car washed? Or like whatever they say, right? And you say to them, stay on track. We need to be focused. I'm talking to you about this. Well, then tension goes way up, and actually their ability to bring in an off-topic comment, or it may be an attempt for them to regulate just a little bit more. And so we want to like see those, and each time those come up, actually turn towards those and be really accepting about those. Okay, I kind of went on a little tangent there, but let me get back on track. Okay. So optional extra credit in terms of instituting security is when you're bringing up a conversation and you want them to see you as a secure base, and it's a tricky conversation. Maybe it's conflict oriented, or it's a discussion that's one of those tougher discussions. Then when you first seek the consent-based contact with them and they agree to have the conversation, if you say to them, hey, do you need anything before we have this talk? Before we have this conversation, again, that's another one of those things that just says, wow, I'm really important to you. You really care about my condition. You really you're tracking and giving me this opportunity for me to like connect with myself and a resource. Do I really need anything to have this conversation? Well, gosh, Mom, I literally haven't gone to the bathroom yet since I got home from school. Let me go to the bathroom and then I can have this conversation. Guess what? You're going to have a better conversation. Or I really need a sandwich, or can I please just make this one, whatever it is, and then we can come back and talk about it. So try really hard to help your child to do that kind of inner scanning and resourcing and kind of awareness, that mindfulness exercise to say, am I resourced enough to have this conversation that we're about to have? And so allow them to kind of experiment and figure out what they might need. It's an amazing gift that you're giving them. And so you get lots and lots of teen parenting extra credit for that one. Okay. So as I said, it's a big bonus. It encourages mindfulness, reflexivity, and positive resourcing. It's totally relational. And wouldn't we want the same heads up from a serious conversation from our own parent, or, you know, from our teen, from our partner, from our boss, etc. Okay. Okay, so here's another tip. We want to meet attachment needs at reunions, and we talked about a little bit about this before, but whenever in Gottman's couples therapy, we're constantly talking about really important moments in relationship are coming together and parting. And these are highly representative of the attachment style that you have. So when we see our kid for the first time when they're coming back home from school, if we make a moment to literally find them with our eyes and our presence and just like radiate just a tiny bit of like nonverbal love or verbal love, it really goes a long way in showing that child that we were positively anticipating our reunion while they were gone, that we were carrying them in our mind in a really positive light. So that's that kind of that object permanency that psychologists talk about a lot. But what it basically means is I know who I am in front of you, and I know who I am when I'm not in front of you, and I know that your love is still there for me. I know that your positive regard is there for me. And we want to message them that. So you really want to watch and just kind of like, if you've ever kind of done the grumpy face when they come home, you know, we really want to kind of interrupt that process and switch out for something that's much more conscious, much more intentional, and much more positive in terms of a positive attachment exercise. Something that's going to remind them that we are their safe base, their safe harbor, and that safe launching spot. And they can always come to us, and they can count on we're highly predictable for being able to offer them that reception. Okay, so do you see me? Do you care that I'm here? Am I enough, or do you need me to be better in some way? Can I tell I am special to you by the way that you look at me? So many of us may or may not have come from, you know, parenting situations ourselves where, you know, maybe there was some toxicity in our own family of origin, or maybe things were really kind of crazy or chaotic, and it just wasn't possible for there to be that intentionality, and there weren't the resources to be able to do that. So we just want to try 33% of the time to kind of get these types of things right. So that's not a huge, it's not an astronomically hard kind of ratio to hit. But the more you practice it, then the easier it gets, and it becomes ritual. And ritual is kind of defined as, or habit is kind of defined as something that you can kind of do automatically without really thinking about it. And so we want to do that. We want to have like that smile on our face when we see our loved one. So even if we're upset with a behavior our teen has chosen and an idea that they appear to hold, it's important for us to be predictable in the way in which we come together. Otherwise, we risk becoming an object to be feared or be scared by. Dan Siegel talks about that being, you know, the beginnings of that dismissive attachment, or that fearful or disorganized attachment, when we can't count on the person who is our significant care provider, our love object, to like really be there for us, and that we can count on them. So it negatively predicts our child's attachment, causing a disorganized or insecure template to be formed, which shapes the way that they presume how others hold them and how they hold others in their mind's eye. So attachment styles are a way we believe we are held by our most significant others. And for our teens, This is their parents, their care providers, but it's also going to be their best friends, boyfriends, their girlfriends, their romantic partners, teachers, coaches, bosses, or other authority figures, etc. So it really gives them a lot of confidence to be able to recognize, someone who is a safe harbor and be able to distinguish that from maybe something else. Okay. Let's talk about resilience through repair and ruptures. And we're going to spend a little bit of time. We're at a really good place. There's going to be time for everybody to ask questions and we can kind of dialogue together at the end of this. But this one's probably going to take at least half of the time. So let's talk about what is rupture and repair. How do I know it works? What does it look like or sound like in real life? And how do I foster this in my family culture? So to give us a better understanding of how resilience is created via repairing relational ruptures, we're going to turn towards research from Dan Siegel again, and also consider the massive contribution of Edward Tronick, UMass Medical School Psychiatry Department, winner of the 2022 Sigourney Award for outstanding work advancing psychoanalytic principles globally, an NSF award winner, National Science Foundation, and award recipient for the International Congress of Infant Studies. His collegial work with Claudia Gold, MD, author of The Silenced Child, The Developmental Science of Early Childhood, has been really instrumental in changing how we look at forging trust, building intimacy and resiliency via deepening relationships through predictable rupture and repair. So their groundbreaking book, and literally it was the best book I read during all of COVID, it was amazing, is called The Power of Discord: Why the Ups and Downs of Relationships Are the Secret to Building Intimacy, Resilience, and Trust. It was released in 2020, and it's really a must read for relationally oriented clinicians and for relationally oriented parents who are courageous enough to acknowledge mistakes and misses with their family members, and who are really looking for hope, for inspiration, and science-backed repairs. Maybe that was something that just got brushed under the carpet in your family of origin, and really there's no shame in admitting or acknowledging, I literally have no skills and don't know how to do this part of your process. It's a lot of courage just to kind of get to that place where you can say, hey, I really want to do this mindfully, and it's great that there's science that I can kind of depend on. Okay. This is for those who are rooted enough to know that there are tremendous opportunities in leaning in towards relational suffering. And so this is a book for those who would be reassured by a how-to and a how it works type of book, and I highly recommend it. So the basic premise is that we injure others with our words, our tone, our affect, our gesture, etc. And when we do, our response following predicts whether or not we grow stronger physiologically, neurobiologically, and psychologically as a person. Our reparative process, our reparative response, or lack thereof, also predicts the integrity, intimacy, and depth of the relationship, not the depth of the relationship. Although if you don't do it and then you avoid, then that's kind of the depth of the relationship, but the depth of the relationship. So when we go back to our teen and we say, hey, my behavior wasn't what was good for either of us. It created suffering for both of us, and there's a better path, and for various reasons, I didn't take it, and I'm sorry. I should have called a time out, and we could have had a different conversation when we were both resourced enough to have that conversation. I really find that it's super helpful with my clients for them to move away from distancing from the behavior that they did that they regret, and it increases accountability, it increases motivation, and everything that you do towards change when you actually name the behavior that you would prefer to kind of do a cover. And what I mean by a cover is like, so say, dad came in and he like broke the toy over his knee because it was left out, which would be horrible, right? But I mean, parents do things when they're in limbic states. And so of course wasn't the right thing, but then he says to the son or the daughter or whomever, he says to the child or the teenager, well, yeah, when we had to throw away your toy, so that was like removed, right? He just didn't kind of go for it and say the behavior that he really did, the actual behavior, which is helpful for the child because it does certain things in their brain that literally let things go, and also doesn't create kind of this gap that children infer that was so shameful that if I did that, I can't even acknowledge it out loud. So we're literally showing them the way to kind of avoid taking responsibility and personal accountability by distancing ourselves from the things in which, are really harmful to the relationship. But by acknowledging it, we do the very opposite. We say, wow, I have a lot of like integrity and courage and acceptance and love for myself and self-compassion that I can name the behavior that I did that I don't want to do again, and I'm taking responsibility for. Okay. Oh, and then this part is really key too. So they say, I did X, whatever it was. And then they say, and I'm imagining that that could have felt this way or that way for you. So now what you're doing is you're just stepping in and you're showing empathy for what you imagine it must have been like for them. And you don't have to be right, but that's why you say, I'm imagining. You don't say, I'm sure you felt this way. You had to have felt this way, right? Because then that kind of like puts them into a box. So instead you're saying, I imagine, or I wondered if you felt this way, or I might have felt this way and I don't know if you do, but I'm, really sorry about that suffering. And then you say this, sorry. I'd like to know how you experienced that. This is super important in Dan Siegel's work. This piece is really, really key to like being able to fully let go of and forgive and move into a better place, like to resolve what they're carrying so that it doesn't become that elephant in the carpet and this thing between you and them in the relationship that prevents closeness and greater intimacy. So you ask them. This is where that skill that we talked about from the very beginning about asking them for their experience and then listening. And I tell, if it's a really hot topic, you can do a little trick with your brain by like pulling out a piece of paper and writing down what they say. So if you're afraid that the issue is kind of tricky, you might even get triggered, or you might get flooded again, or you might have like feelings or disagreement come back up for you and kind of like intrude on the process or that moment, then you can write things down, because when you're writing something down, your brain doesn't have enough time to process what's coming in and the output at the same time that the response is coming up. If you see yourself, you'll be writing and then all of a sudden they'll say something you disagree with maybe, or it wasn't the same for you, and you'll stop writing. That's the danger sign. Keep writing. And then you can come back to it and you can question it later, or you can share your thoughts, but only after you golden question, because each person really should have that experience, full, rich, robust experience of really feeling heard and really feeling cared about and really feeling that their experience is accepted. And that's that key piece that does a lot of really optimizing neural development. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. So I'd like to know how you experience that, and can we both identify some strategies to have a different outcome next time? So can we talk now or when? Before next Tuesday at 6? Can we talk about this? So again, that's that consent-based communication. It's always really, really good. There's kind of a recipe for when you're doing a consent-based contact. It looks like, hey, honey, I want to talk to you. I'm imagining it's going to take about 25 minutes. Always give yours like double it. It's going to take 25 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, this is where I'm hoping that will be. And then what it would provide for me, or how having this conversation would support me, is this. I'm telling myself the story that, we're going to be able to let this go, and that we're going to feel a lot better for our vacation tomorrow, or like whatever it is, or I'm going to feel a little bit better about letting you choose your own clothes because I've, shared what my worries are, my fears about, some of your choices of of clothing or whatever it is, or you're hanging out with that one friend. I just, I want to talk about that a little bit more and hear from you as well. So you're telling them, how long it's going to take, what it's about, and where you're hoping to get at the end. You're asking them, do they need anything in order to have this conversation? Can they have the conversation now? And then remember that Inc. article that said, know what your limits are. So if you can't go longer than, next week on Thursday, tell them when the limit is. And then also set up, well, if we can't do it at this point, then we're going to have to shift some things around, or we're not able to do X, Y, or Z, because this conversation is very important. Repair of rupture is something that we value and we're going to prioritize in our family. Okay. So you don't have to remember all of this, because it turns out there's this thing called Google. And this type of conversation is really templated in Gottman method couples therapy. So it works for teens and kids as well. You can Google the template on the interwebs. You just look for the words that you want to look for are aftermath of the fight or repair of a regrettable incident. And there you can find a step-by-step guide. It's 5 steps in total. And the main for how to recover and repair from a relational injury. So we're going to go through each of those steps today. So the main goal is to vulnerably share your experience. And in this case, to let your teen speak first, because you want to model being a good listener so that when it's their turn, that they know what to do, because they're not going to remember. But they're going to see it, and they're going to build that kind of embodied experience of feels like to move through rupture with someone who really prioritizes understanding and does the things that we know scientifically produce a result of deepening intimacy and relationship, really kindling trust, and really kindling a lot of positive social regard for one another. And wouldn't we all like that? Okay. So the main goal is to vulnerably, we already talked about that. And then you'll definitely go over after, and remember that the transition between their story and your story, your side of things, is going to be the golden question. Honey, we'll talk about later. Okay. So, So they will have more compassion for your experience when you first model and grant them the compassion and understanding you first demonstrate, because we as parents really need to be the strong leader. That's never changed. So we want to ask how their desired needs or wants in the communication went awry. We want to encourage them to stay in the first person experience and state things like, Mom, when I heard you say X, not Mom, when you said blah, blah, blah. Because if we don't agree with that, then what that does in the body is it produces a little bit of tension. Well, now I'm listening to you and you told me how it was, but I don't agree with that. So now I have like tension in my body. And so the tension in your body is actually signaling there's a lot more afferent connections that go up from your guts and from your body into your brain that tell your brain to be alarmed that there's danger and something's wrong. So we really want to focus on all of the little tricks that we can do to calm the body down so that the body is sending to our brain, this is safe, we can work this through together. We're not going to flood and get overwhelmed by this, but we can have this conversation and it actually feels good. And that's your goal. Okay, so that's that key tip, is just to say, when I heard you say versus when you said, or you did this instead, I saw you do this, or I heard about it, or and that meant that you were thinking this. Instead of that, you would want to say, I told myself a story about what that meant, right? That's easier to hear. We can agree with someone that they told a story about what that something meant. Okay. So I'm frequently, So you have to say what you observed or saw, not mistakenly leap into assuming the intention or design of your teen. That is so super important. So I'm frequently surprised when doing this with my kids, how my point of view was actually so far off of what their point of view, or what was the context that was leading the behavior that they did. And I have a very different assumption, you know, about what that behavior what meant or whatever. So it's really surprising when we do this, and can be really healing in relationships and in family relationships, because I think, you know, many of us had family of origin experiences that were quite difficult, and were unsafe in conflict. So this is a very healing process to do it in this very intentional and mindful way. So bravo, all of your efforts, growth mindset. Okay. So it's perfectly legitimate. This is another key point, and we talked about this earlier, but it's perfectly legitimate to have multiple points of views at any given time. In fact, this is what you will have in social engagement. It's essential that everyone be okay that one person experienced this and the other something very different. And we don't argue about whose experience was right or, you know, real. That's just a total waste of time. We accept with openness, curiosity, and compassion the experience of the other. We say, oh, okay, yikes, I see that was your experience, and that is bananas. I'm really sorry. So a baby, let's go into the brain now. So a baby who experiences typical mismatch and repair, so their mom is like out of sync with them in terms of mirroring or attunement, but then the baby kind of has this pullback, or, you know, the baby activates some sort of behavior to kind of bring the mom back on board and be in attunement. Those babies who experience lots of mismatch and repair, they develop into people who have an internal voice that says, I can change things. When people move through mismatch to repair over and over again in relationships, whether it's infants or adults, they develop agency. I can handle this. I can change things. And that's defined earlier as that sense that one has control over one's life and the power to act effectively in the world. And I'm going to tell you how that happens in a second. But they come to a new situation with a hopeful feeling. They're armed with positive affective core. And but when they carry an expectation of perfection, that there can't be mismatch, or that mismatch means something's wrong, whenever and right where that's gonna be the association when there's mismatch and it's not resolved or it's ignored, and then the baby's like, well, something's wrong for me, but it wasn't wrong for them. Is that, I mean, because they're social referencing all the time, right? So then they begin to not trust the experience of the self. If you don't trust the experience of the self, then you can't really arrive with a lot of self-confidence in the here and now moments. Okay, so when they carry an expectation of perfection, they miss out on the success of moving through the bad moment to a good one, of bumping the boundaries of their own selves against the boundaries of another. And that's a quote from the Power of Discord book. Okay, so it's the, you know, you don't build muscle by not breaking a muscle down, right? And we don't build social skillfulness by not going through the discord, and going through the discord with multiple people, because people do discord differently, and people respond in like novel ways, and they're not the same as like the mother or the father or the sister or whatever. That diversity offers the child a lot more strength and diversity of responding, which is amazing. So, okay, I'm going off onto a tangent, so I'm going to refocus here. All right, so the next tip here is become trustworthy and less scary. That sounds good. But in order to do that, we have to recognize when we are flooding, when we're triggered by something, and we really need to take a break to come back much calmer. So I'm going to talk about what flooding actually is. So flooding is a state of diffuse physiological arousal. So physiological arousal across a variety of regulatory capacities. So our heart rate, our breath, you know, our thought process, our emotional state. So we call this DPA, and you can see it on your Apple Watch or other biometric devices. So it's going to register as a blip up and above your normal resting heart rate. And your spikes are going to tell you that you're communicating with someone when you're outside your optimal zone of tolerance. And so that's not really great for the conversation or for you or for your teen. Everything when you are in diffuse physiological arousal, your blood flow goes to these very core defensive parts of you that are ready to go into a freeze response, right? Which is like going to require a lot of like tension and kind of like pulling in and contraction of the body. They could go into a fawning response, which is like, oh, let me fix this, let me like appease whatever's happening, we can make this right. That's so that almost like that panic driven, I can make things better. Or that fight, right? Like, well, I'm gonna fight this out. No, I'm gonna get really angry, I'm gonna like show you the way it is. Or that freeze response. Wait, did I already say freeze? Fight? Oh, flight response. Yeah, so just like, I need to get out of here, I can't handle this anymore, goodbye. Which if you're in DPA, the best choice for you is literally to call a timeout and to like take a break and do something to decrease your physiological arousal. There's a lot you can do actually in the moment in vivo. And many of you have probably worked with therapists, or you are a therapist and you have a whole like list, you know, a Rolodex of those little tricks that you can do to help bring your body back to homeostasis. And these are regulatory skills or regulation skills, and they're great. And we can do co-regulation with others too. So when we notice tension in the body in our teen, we can say, hey, we can take a deep breath, right? And pull our shoulders down and say, you know what, this relationship is really important. We're going to go slow and do this really intentional, and we're going to have a better result, right? How are you doing? Well, I don't know, I'm nervous. Okay, well, we can be with that. So just, you know, providing a little bit of extra support when we do notice the tension kind of coming up is super, super helpful to having a better conversation. So I would say if you are with your teen and you notice that there's too much kind of tension or anxiety, or there's too much intensity in the way that the conversation is going, then check your biometric device and literally pay attention to it frequently and notice when those little blips come back up. And then and a lot of people don't recognize when they're in arousal or over arousal. And the reason why is because if you grew up in a toxic environment, etc., and you had arousal all the time, in order to function, you're going to kind of like dampen down your awareness of that. And so a lot of my clients will come in and they'll say, you know, oh, we actually feel very centered when we're having an argument. And I'll say, okay, that's fine, but let's just monitor. And sure enough, they'll be like, oh my gosh, really? That's how high my heart rate is right now? Or, you know, we can wear oxygen saturation detection as well. And then that can tell that we're holding our breath. And so all of those things, again, in the body are signaling to the brain, danger, danger, danger. And so there's a lot more room for misinterpretation and misattribution of intent because we're filtering for what is dangerous. We're going to oversee it. So regulation, regulation, regulation. Okay, so relational communication definitely pauses for a better outcome. And you want to take the time out earlier than later, always. So taking time out's not just for couples therapy. And if we power through, we often really harm the relationship. So we want to end the conversation really well. And so in order to do that, we really need to take the break earlier than later. And knowing your own inner triggering thoughts or evaluations. For instance, my trigger word when I know like I'm flooded or I'm moving rapidly towards being flooded is if they would only listen. Like as soon as they would only listen, I'm too far. Oops, too far gone. I need to really like end it right away. And I've lost my grip in terms of prioritization of understanding. That's out the window now. I'm really into influence. If they would only listen to me, they would know, right? Like I've lost it. I've lost my priority. So I'm down in the dirty trying to influence preemptively, and influencing prior to understanding leads to the experience of coercive control. And that is not a value we want in our families. And we don't really want that coming up and practiced and then done in the world either. Coercive control is not relational communication. So we set the expectation for calm communication, non-violent, non-coercive communication, and we relinquish demanding codependence by acknowledging our own true limits to resources and redirect ourselves and our team to finding those resources in order to have a better conversation later. So conflict or a better conversation or conflict discussion or any type of dialoguing that can be tough for us to do. So sometimes we need a timeout. And something that's really important to keep in mind is that domestic violence risk greatly increases when we push through, when we don't allow for a productive break in order to calm down and cool off, and especially when we block a person's exit. Super, super important. Blocking the exit really triggers some very primal responses. And couples who you would never think, or families who you would never think, oh, they're a family that has family violence inside them. If this skill of not being able to take the time out is not honed and practiced and kept sacred, and there's not a resolute commitment to taking a break when we're really upset, and if we go into that place where our own attachment anxiety maybe gets triggered around a disorganized attachment, which is, oh my gosh, they're going to leave and what are they going to do? You know, something's really going to go bad. That's when we tend to like grab on and become really preoccupied and anxious and also disorganized and angry and dismissive at the same time. And those are the times when domestic violence becomes a greater risk. And so we want to protect and ensure that our families can be really safe and high functioning families by making sure we're watching everybody, right? And we don't say, hey, looks like you really need to cool off. That's not going to go well either, right? So it's more like if you notice your partner like kind of sweating or holding their breath, or the shoulders are coming up, or like something, or your teen, right? Then you say to them, you know, I'm wondering if we could have a better conversation if we took a break for a little bit, 20 minutes maybe, and then we'll come back, you know, and try again. And then during that break, well, I'm off. I want to make sure that I'm getting everything. So try to come back in under an hour and set a time to finish the conversation when you can both be more calm and centered. So something biologically different between you know, cisgender men and cisgender females is that females actually have the capacity to move through a stress response, a biological stress response or state of arousal much more quickly than men do. And men show higher signs of stress, cortisol and other stress hormones in their body, even up to 24 hours after an argument. And sometimes actually their peaks in terms of some of those stress responses in their body can actually block, it serves as like a beta blocker. So when your partner, your teen son says, well, I don't really remember what that was about, they literally don't remember what it was about because their beta blockers were really high. And beta blockers are one of those things that prevent like the laying down of like a logical and coherent and cohesive narrative, which is another reason why when someone has trauma or when, you know, you're really up, you can't really remember or put things in logical order. So we have to like just be more protective of our body and keep things like really cool. Ooh, 7:25. Okay. Okay, when you take a break and how you take a break is actually really interesting. So for couples, we always have, you know, the couple, you know, each partner writes the script for how they want the other partner to signal them to take a break. So you hear the words that make it really easy for you to take a break. And we can ask that from our teens too. You know, if we notice that things are really hot and we want to call a break, how would you like me to call it? You know, like, what would you like me to say that would make it easy for us to just take a little bit of a break here? And they can kind of script that in. Again, that helps them to kind of get to know the self and become more self-aware. Okay, so on your break, do something truly nourishing. Ruminating is going to increase your chance of being re-triggered or worse, kind of fueling your flood so that you haven't ever broken away and taken your mind off of it. This was studied by writing a whole bunch of intense words and then for a group of students, college students, and then half of the group were given magazines to like look through, and then the other half were not. And the other half that were not, they literally, and the magazines were like kind of peaceful magazines, but the other half, they came back and they had much more negative. They wrote down much more negative words and remembered many, many more negative words than the group who had like looked through the magazine for a little bit. So really take your mind off of something. Some people can't go out and take a really strong, brisk walk, because what that's doing is it's telling their body, like, be alarmed, be alarmed. So kind of get to know your own body and see what does it for you. Reading a book, doing poetry, looking through pictures. There's an amazing app that the VA has put out. It's a PTSD coach, and there's all of these ways that you can kind of customize the app to get it to work for you. And it monitors how long, because it will rate like, oh, well, what's your number now? Like, how stressed are you? And then it kind of tracks, and it can get really smart and tell you, you'll learn which exercises actually bring you back down to homeostasis much more quickly. It's a great app. You can store music and pictures that really do things, you know, for you're learning how to respond to your body, which is really self-compassionate and beautiful. Okay, so I added this slide here from another presentation, but sometimes when we're really upset about something, we're telling ourselves these 5 statements here. There's something wrong. There's something I must fix. I'm going to read off my script here. So these 5 fallacies are really from Todd Pressman's Deconstructing Anxiety model, and they really do help. They're great when we realize our arousal is kind of headed northward, and you or your teen is starting to lose track of the conversation, or any other time that anxiety spikes. And they're challenges, really. So for number 1, there's something wrong. Then we say to ourselves, because you'll catch yourself saying there's something wrong, like there's something wrong. Is there really something wrong here? Or isn't this the part of the norm for growing adolescents and raising teen kids? Aren't there going to be times like that? Yes, there's going to be time. Conflict is totally normal. Yes, conflict is totally normal. Aren't these differences normal? Yes. So you can kind of see where I'm going. So we can kind of challenge ourselves in that moment, not to invalidate ourselves or our feeling. We definitely feel that there's something wrong, but then we can kind of talk ourselves, you know, down a little bit and just say, well, is there, because problems, again, in the power of discord, are going to drive a lot greater family intimacy over time if we learn how to turn towards those things and be really calm in the presence of our partner and our family members whom we love. So number 2 is, there's something I must fix. So does it really need to be fixed? Really? Maybe not. Maybe this problem's coming up because we need to learn something about each other, or we need to like iterate a family agreement or something. And then number 3, it's up to me to fix it. You know, a lot of us get pulled into that one. And then we have to say, seriously, just you have to fix it. Interesting. Number 4 is, I have to be having a different experience than the one I'm having now. And then we can say to ourselves, well, really, acceptance in the moment, action later, after the ebb of the anxiety. And this is the one experience I am having. So quick, find some self-compassion for this experience. And number 5 is, I have to realize a different outcome than the outcome I'm having right now. So number 5 is, there's a lesson here, and it could be lost if it wasn't for this moment. So once we're a little bit more resolved, then we can find that moment. Okay, so I hope that maybe helps some of you guys. You can put that in your back pocket. Another tip, squaring up to the problem versus the person. So most problems are really a competition for the allocation of a precious resource. So what we want to do is we want to identify the resource allocation issue, because that takes the problem outside of our teen or our spouse or our boss or, our best friend whom we're really not getting along with right now. And then it really puts the problem, so it externalizes somewhere where we can make it workable, and we can both kind of look at it and see, well, what is it that's in dispute here? Or what is it that we're kind of competing for right here? So commonly with our teens, it's going to be discretionary time. household responsibilities and roles. It's going to be finances, like how are we spending our money as a family? You know, what is being called for, and you know, or is there some not taking responsibility, or do we imagine that there's waste, or like whatever it could be. And then extra and nuclear family engagement, what that looks like. Oh, you're not getting along really well with your sister. Well, maybe we need to dial into that a little bit more and find out what's happening. But, or well-being, which includes sexuality. And these are some of the tasks that teens are facing, right? They're facing that really important need to find a peer group and find a place for themselves in that peer group where they're valued, and where they are in partnership with some of their friends and they're learning about that. And they feel good about the people that they're with. And then they're also kind of building their brain, and then they're also learning about their own sexuality at this stage, and their own proficiency and their own individuality at this stage. So squaring up to the problem versus the person is really going to build a lot of trust and intimacy in all of your relationships. Facing or squaring up to the problem, not the person. So trust comes from acknowledging that there's a problem, and both people feeling that they're going to turn towards the problem. And because there's this expectation and this prediction that it's going to happen with warmth and confidence, that we can create solutions that work, then we really learn to trust that the relationship is a catalyst to growth, that it adapts, it grows, it meets both of our needs. We see relationships that manage, resolve problems in calm, loving ways as safe. So avoidance doesn't really work. We just grow to avoid the person, and the relationships, joie de vie, it kind of dies. So whatever is special about that relationship kind of disintegrates. And so to nurture opportunity for increasing intimacy, we need to stop to identify many, many ways to solve the problem we are having. And then we communicate our needs honestly and directly. Honey, it doesn't seem to be working to save laundry for Friday nights. What other solutions can we come up with to share the load? I need the laundry done before the weekend. So similarly, we can offer our teens the same respect, the same opportunity to problem solve and meet their own contributions to family life. So there's a way to approach the problems which can really help or hurt. And we already covered that with gentle startup. But what if everything went regrettably? How do we formally resolve and repaired? That was those the rupture and repair steps that we did before. Here they are again. So, okay, so steps to repair. The first is really this like intentional start. We really want to have a consent-based communication with them. We want to set up a time to talk. We want to do that kind of check-in where we tell them what we're wanting to talk about and if they want to need anything. And then we also have kind of pre-processed what our goal is and how we're going to approach it with them. And we're going to approach it in this is a resource allocation issue. It's not a moral deficit inside you or a characterological flaw, right? It's a problem we can work through. Okay, so I know we're getting close on 7:35. I want to make sure that I give everybody time to talk too. So I'm afraid to touch my computer or something's going to go awry, but I'm going to try here. Let's see, view. Okay. All right, so we're going to discuss some common barriers to positive communication. Oh, this is actually really important, so I should share this piece with you too. Okay, so as we shared before in relational communication, starting an intentional communication requires consent-based contact. And this ensures that both you and your teen agree to what you will speak about, thus delimiting the discussion. It's when you say what you're going to talk about, the kitchen sink does not get thrown in, right? Because you've already said what you're going to talk about. So bringing that extra content in is maybe not so helpful, and you can only really solve one problem at a time anyway. So eventually they're going to know what to expect, and the formula is very predictable and validated to help both people feel better about the engagement, to release what resentment is harbored, and to engage in reflexively identifying strategies for a better next time. This is what drives the reparative experience. That is what deepens trust, builds intimacy and accountability. and it requires and utilizes the interconnections of the brain to resolve the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect is like whatever is undone is in like heavy rotation. And so our brain is actually carrying a higher cognitive load, and we're not as fully capable when we're carrying high cognitive loads because there's unfinished business up at work inside. It reduces the stress load in our brain, thus minimizing downstream and upstream stress processes. So this is a whole brain system approach. And what was injured in relationship is restored in relationship. So the common barriers. One of the common barriers is not taking enough time to be able to reflect and empathize and to ask questions or explore something that emerges. I always tell people, aim to respond to like whatever content the speaker was sharing, whether that's your teen or your spouse or whomever. Aim like 3 to 5 different ways of relating to that content, like so compassion, validation, empathy, a query. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so not taking the time is really, that's a barrier. And then being what we call halts: hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed. Not taking the time to like be resourced for the conversation. So make sure to get some food, rest, relaxation before having difficult conversations or conflict communication with your family members, and especially our teens. So not noticing when either of you or your team gets pulled out of the role that they are in. So this can happen if one of you is speaker and the person asked to weigh in prior to reflection. Well, what do you feel about this, honey? Like, I just shared all this stuff. What do you feel about that? Well, if then the honey starts to respond, then the reflection hasn't happened. So the tension is still in the body of the speaker because they haven't been accurately reflected, which decreases the tension, allows for that social generosity that kind of keeps the communication going and light and easy and workable. And I just tell, families and couples that I work with, if you don't know who's the speaker or the listener, just get back on track. Who's speaker or listener? One of you might know, or where should we start? So write down to train your brain to listen. This prevents you from jumping in with responses and disagreements, which is not really the right time. Missing repeated criticism that should have been framed as unmet desires or vulnerable needs. Going critical and not rephrasing into that gentle startup. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I was hoping for or wanting from you. I'm realizing I needed that in that moment, versus you did this and then this and then this, right? So speaking about the person's behavior as if it's fact and not perception. We talked about that earlier. Or assuming intent, motivation, or fear-based worries as true. Failing to attend more deeply to the content shared by the speaker before asking the golden question. It's really hard to see someone share all of this content and then the other person just say, okay, that must be really hard. It sounds really hard. Do you feel I understand? No, not really. I don't feel like you understand. You didn't share back what I just got finished saying. So do ask questions and do spend some time with that content, and not Socratic methoding them because you're trying to pitch your own perspective on that and trying to realign their point of view or their perspective to yours. That's really a waste of everyone's time. Failing to attend more deep. Oh, we did talk about that. Number 8 is not asking the golden question before switching roles. So that's that one really sweet spot where you say, honey, do you feel like I understand this issue for you? And then when your teen says, yeah, mom, I feel like you really get it. Wow, that's gold, right? And then you could say, well, honey, I have some of my own thoughts. Would you be able to listen to those now? Is this a good time for you? Are you able to listen to these thoughts that I'm having? Yeah, mom, I want to hear your side too. And then now you're off and running, right? Now both people are being heard. So failing to signal nonverbal compassion. This also happens a lot. If there's tension or if it was a dispute between two people or something, then a lot of times there's that, blocking, you just don't even kind of like look at the person, right? And so you're messaging with your body, your nonverbal communication, that you're not paying attention. So really try really hard to kind of like make eye contact. And when the person who you're talking to breaks eye contact, follow their eye contact and then come back, so you don't want to like, oh, I'm trying to get you, because when people are looking away, then they're often trying to get organized in their brain and having a moment of regulation, so we can honor that. Okay, so let's talk about things to do instead. So one is assume the need for resources, assume need for resource and offer something. Do you need anything? Do you want a cup of tea before we have this conversation? Do you need a glass of water? Do you want to go to the bathroom? Whatever that is. Especially when kids are coming home and they have things in their hands. There's a study that showed that there's more stress in the body when your hands are full. So if you have all this stuff in your hands, don't try to have a conversation. Put all the stuff down so that your body can feel more relaxed. Express nonverbal acceptance and compassion. You nod, you mirror, you attune, you inhibit laughing or any other incongruent effect, because that's going to be odd and kind of, it's going to be so incongruent that it pulls the speaker out of what they're trying to say. So really try to be tracking and be as attuned and, having that same affect that you're seeing as much as possible, doing that mirroring. You want to say, I think I'm understanding, or I'm beginning to understand. And what I hear you say is, if I'm tracking correctly, these are all the things you say instead of, I understand, I got your point. Because what that basically meant, when you say, I understand, sweetie, or I got that, you told me that already. What that basically says is, shut up, I'm tired, I'm done, I don't really want to hear anymore, right? So we really have to pull that. We don't want to say, I understand, because that assumes a lot. We want to say, I think I understand. I'm starting to understand. And that's you can see tension in the body as a therapist, right? Or as a couples therapist, like you can literally see when someone says that there's tension in the other person's body. Because, do you? Okay, I'm just going to make this assumption. I poured my heart out and now I've been told that you understand. Okay, right? So dial that back. Ask a question. Always put the question mark at the end of all of your reflections. Parroting can sometimes fail, so we just ask for generosity. If your partner is balking when you get it wrong, when you reflecting back, we say, I'm sorry, I'm doing my best. Can you tell me one more time? And then we want to reorient to role. I think that you were speaking and I stepped in, so go back. I'm listening again. I can speak to that later. If they interrupt, then you can always share that it would be important to me that you're able to hear my point of view as well. Maybe listen now, and we can come back to what is coming up for you after I've shared. Thank you, I appreciate that. So we want to encourage listening and speaking with positive reinforcement. Thanks. This is helping us understand one another. We're trying to understand one another, and that matters greatly. So when fear about intention and meaning come up, then we really want to take responsibility. When that happened, or I heard that, I told myself this is what it meant. The story I told myself about that happened was this, right? So that's taking responsibility. And we want to model coming back to gentleness when criticism comes up. We want to say, hey, I think I can hear you better when you're telling me what was missing here for you. What were you wanting instead? How did you want it to go in that moment? So if they're starting to be critical, you just ask these questions to get them back on track. What were you hoping would happen next? I'm really curious about that. You said I did this, but what was it that you were wanting? So that's a quick way to kind of repair and get back on track into that positive. And when you ask the golden question and your teen adds information, they add more. When you say, do I understand it? And they say, well, there's this one part that I'm realizing right now. Wow, good job. Pat yourself on the back. You're a good listener, and they're really deepening. So that's great. That's a really good outcome. Please don't judge yourself for I did the best I could. I was listening to every word you said. That's not helpful. So we really want to accurately reflect, ask a question, validate, empathize, and explore their point of view. And this helps avoid the game of only servers being on the court. And the ball is just getting whacked back and forth, and nobody really knows what's really happening with the message that's being sent back and forth across the net. Okay. Okay, so validating feelings. So when you're asking your team to share their feelings with you, you know, it's really important that you don't dispute any feelings that can come up. Whatever feelings come up, they come up. So validate the feelings. It doesn't mean that you're endorsing them. If your 2-year-old said, I'm mad that the paper has a wrinkle, and we really wouldn't go into how the wrinkle wasn't really big enough to worry about, because that's really dismissing, and that's dismissing their suffering, and it's really disrespectful. So whatever feelings come up, they come up, and we can, you know, have empathy or compassion for, even if, you know, that's not how we would feel. We really want to create a culture of, you know, not only tolerance, but acceptance of different feelings. Actions are something different. But similarly, we wouldn't want to get into an argument about what our teens feel. They feel what they feel, it comes up, and feelings pass. Accepting feelings is just accepting feelings. It doesn't have anything to do with behaviors. Okay, so you feel angry at your sister. I can appreciate that. Creating a culture where feelings are accepted and we can choose behaviors means we are creating the spaciousness to differentiate feelings from behaviors, and that little bit of space is enough to promote consideration, contemplation, and pausing before acting. It also means that we begin to see that we are not subject to our feelings, that just because we feel something, it doesn't require actions. Feelings, in fact, might benefit from some stillness. And our feelings are not caused by others or actions. Not everyone feels the same way about a given thing. One person in the family might experience fear and another excitement. Both are okay and acceptable. Our actions and thoughts about things are workable. And addressing codependency, we don't blame others for our feelings. You made me feel this way. Instead, we take responsibility. I felt angry when you pinched me. I felt irritated when the lights were not turned off. Not that made me feel. Take responsibility, and we really want to model it. We want to understand our patterns. We want to accept and work with our enduring vulnerabilities. So this means accepting that what is ours and knowing where others begin and end, and no emotional blackmail necessary. I have a story here about the suspiciousness in my family, but I'm going to pass for time. So we can take pause before trusting, but again, it's just a pattern. That's okay. I'm going to skip that part. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oops. Stay on this with this mouse. Okay, and this mouse. All right. Okay, so another step to repair and integrate is third, telling subjective realities, trading your subjective realities. So your teen is going to have a story, and this is going to be their telling of the experience. It's told through their eyes, through their personality, through their resourced state of being or mind at the time. And it's not necessary that we agree on the accuracy or reality. It's probably harmful to argue them out of their way of experiencing and seeing the situation. It's better and healing and integrating to validate their reality and remember that their reality does not invalidate your own. We want to respond with curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. There is so much material that you guys can get if you're just Googling Cole, curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. It's a really powerful kind of way to, like a touchstone to like remember how to respond when things come up for yourself and for others. Dan Siegel speaks convincingly on the power of parents to be integrators. We, with our generous, compassionate acceptance of our teens' reality, promote optimal neural development, optimal regulation, and optimal outcomes across their medical, mental, social, occupational, and spiritual contexts. Let's talk about how. How would accepting your teens' reality do all of those things? And what does it not mean to accept their reality? Again, it does not mean endorsing their reality, but let's kind of get into it. How does this work in the brain? Parents are guiders of attention. That is to say, we empower our teens to examine and to look more deeply at their experience. Where our attention goes, we channel a more in-depth focus of our teens' attention. What we attend to, they do. We are guiding their attention to their experiences, not jumping on the bandwagon with them. We aren't going out armed to fight their battles or to win their heart's desire. That would be a gross violation of their boundaries and be working against their development. We all are spotlights. We spotlight for them, and their attention returns to their experience, giving them another chance to coherently integrate. Where attention goes, neural firing goes, and neural integration grows. This is Dan Siegel's famous quote. Our gift of calm, exploring presence, modeling curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. Each one of those are kind of embedded tenets in mindfulness practices, means that our teens benefit from thinking reflexively about their experience. And it's that encouragement and linking of in action, what was their experience in the moment, on action, what do they think, feel about that experience, what can be learned from it, who was all affected, that's, maybe for action or on action, in what ways manifest consequences, latent consequences, intention, and attention. What's missed? What was happening or didn't happen emotionally, under self-understanding, thought, morality, behavior, all of it. Because of our attention, teens stay soothed and move through emotions with our support, confidence, faith, and integrity to create the space for them to reflexively learn, to integrate the experience across the differentiated parts of the adolescent developing brain. They're watching us as we metabolize their experience. And if we can stay calm and non-reactive, then that helps them to do the same. If we consider what is happening in the teen brain, we see that there is a great deal of developmentally normal synaptic pruning. And this is related to this development of greater differentiation of brain segmentation and specialization, and also interconnectivity between connectomes, which are areas in the brain that specifically function to aid communication between increasingly specializing areas of the brain. These serve as kind of like the on and off ramps of rapidly maturing neural highways, and they become our burgeoning neural networks. And this is like the biggest thing that's happening in the teen brain. So let's look at what we are most concerned about developing in teen brains, which is the prefrontal cortex. And then I'm going to wrap up. So the prefrontal cortex and its neural superhighways, the ventral attention network, the dorsal attention network, there's so much information about that. It's another presentation. It's kind of expanding and growing, and it's the neural connectivity that drives this expansion. But when we're up and when we're blocking, when we're so loud or so up in arms, that's not happening in the teen brain. And if it's not happening, it's not wiring. So I guess maybe we will end here. The very last step, I just want to kind of like show you guys on the slide, and everybody kind of knows how to do that. It's taking responsibility for what set you up for having a bad engagement with your loved one, and any triggers or any implications for self-care or resourcing. And then fifth, just commitments to making a better tomorrow. And you say, one thing I can do differently, honey, to have a better tomorrow would be this, or a better next time. And one thing I might ask of you to do differently next time is this. And so you want to state a positive request again, what to put in the grocery store cart, not what not to do. Okay, that's really key and important. I also just want to give a shout out for sleep. Huge sleep fan. And creating family fun. So you can do like a family Venn diagram. And don't forget to spend one-on-one time with your kids. 10 minutes, 5 times a week, more than, and just a little bit more time than they'd use on screens on the weekends would do it. And that is the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing, and thank you guys very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. I don't know if we have time maybe for like one question, if anyone has something that they want to ask.
Well, I just want to say this was packed full of so much important information. I want to hear it all again. Really
Wow.
excellent, excellent presentation.
Thank you, Robin.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Mhm.
Amanda, for this presentation. And we really appreciate all the research and work that you put into this. It was super helpful for us. I also want to thank all of you all for joining us to learn very much about this important topic. And I want to remind you to please fill out the survey. I will put that link in the chat box right now. This helps us to be able to understand how you experienced each of our events and to make sure that we incorporate that moving forward. Again, I want to thank, we would like to thank all of our sponsors. Without them, we could not be here. These are businesses in Marin who care. Please note them when you have the occasion. Seek them out to do business. They're helping Marin be healthier. First Federal Savings and Loan, Family Recovery Institute, Bank of Marin, Delfino Green and Green, Luther Bank, and WMB2. Please feel free to reach out to CIP if you're interested for therapy. I will put our number in the chat box right now. We work with individuals of all ages. We provide, there's our number. We work with individuals of all ages. We also work with couples and families. We have a sliding scale and accept Beacon Partnership Health and Medi-Cal. And I just want to say this concludes our 4 Raising Healthy Families workshops for this month. And for this year, we thank you so much for joining us. And we will have 4 more next March, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.